Dawn breaks over the Persian Gulf, the skyline of Dubai glimmering like molten gold. Police boats cut through the still water toward a secluded private island owned by one of the city's most powerful royal families. On the shoreline, investigators in white suits step out, their boots sinking into the fine sand. Inside a marble honeymoon villa, curtains torn, perfume bottles shattered, lies the body of a young woman dressed in a blood-stained wedding gown. She was Maria Liza Santos, a 28-year-old Filipina bride who had married the Sheikh's only son just 2 days earlier. What was supposed to be a union of love and luxury has become an international scandal that no one in the royal circle wants to discuss. The official story says she collapsed after an argument, but behind the whispers of the palace staff, the truth is far darker and far more personal. There are signs of a struggle, bruises hidden under the lace, and a phone recovered from the bathroom floor, its messages wiped clean. In the corner, a security camera light blinks, as if still watching the room's final moments. Outside, the Sheikh's son sits in silence, hands trembling, eyes red from rage or regret. Reporters are gathering by the marina, and consulate officials have begun asking questions. Everyone seems to know that this was not a robbery gone wrong. It was a betrayal that began long before the wedding, a secret affair, hidden from the cameras, that would destroy 3 lives and shatter the illusion of royal perfection. Maria Liza Santos had spent nearly a decade in Dubai, a city of relentless heat and glimmering illusions. At 28, she had learned to survive quietly, working as a domestic helper for wealthy families in the high towers of Jumeirah. Her life was a rhythm of service. Wake before dawn, prepare breakfast for people who barely knew her name, and send every extra dirham back home to the Philippines. She dreamed of something better, though she rarely said it out loud, a small salon back home, her mother's medicine, a future she could finally call her own. Her life changed one evening during a charity gala hosted by one of Dubai's most powerful royal families. She wasn't invited. She was hired as part of the event staff, arranging flowers and serving drinks to guests draped in diamonds. It was there that she first caught the attention of Sheikh Hamid bin Rashid Al Nahyan, the Sheikh's only son, young, wealthy, and known for his charm. What began as polite conversation soon turned into an unusual fascination. He returned to speak with her 3 times that night, asking questions no one of his status would ask. Where are you from? Do you miss home? Within weeks, their paths crossed again. He arranged errands that brought her into his circle, first under the guise of charity work, then under something far more personal. The relationship grew in secret, hidden from his family, hidden from the world. To Maria, it felt like destiny, a man of power seeing her not as a servant but as someone worth loving. Her friends called it a miracle. Others whispered warnings. When news of their engagement surfaced months later, it broke the internet. A domestic worker marrying into royalty, it was a modern-day Cinderella story that flooded Filipino news pages and expat forums. Photos of Maria in designer gowns, standing beside the Sheikh's son, circulated everywhere. She smiled in every picture, but those close to her noticed the tension behind her eyes. Inside the royal family, the union was far from celebrated. The Sheikh's father reportedly disapproved, viewing the match as a scandal. Rumors said his mother refused to attend the engagement dinner. Maria was thrust into a world of unimaginable wealth and silent hostility. Every gesture, every outfit, every word she spoke was judged. The maids she once worked alongside now lowered their eyes when she passed, unsure whether to greet her or avoid her altogether. In this glittering cage, she found only one familiar face, Adil Khan, the Sheikh's personal bodyguard. He had been assigned to her for security, always standing a few feet behind during public appearances. Quiet, disciplined, and kind, Adil treated her with a respect that reminded her of who she used to be. When she was overwhelmed by the palace's strict etiquette or the cold glances of the royal matriarch, it was Adil who offered a reassuring word. Their conversations were brief, almost innocent at first, exchanges of comfort in a life that no longer felt like her own. But as the wedding approached, those moments grew heavier with unspoken emotion. Maria began to realize that the fairy tale she had stepped into was never meant to have a happy ending. Behind the gilded walls, whispers spread that the Sheikh's son had become possessive and controlling, monitoring her movements, questioning her loyalty. The staff said he feared losing her not to status or scandal, but to something much simpler, genuine affection. And through it all, the bodyguard remained in the background, his quiet presence constant. He was always near, watching, listening, perhaps too closely. Maria Liza Santos had escaped poverty, but she had entered a different kind of prison. The world saw a bride-to-be living a dream. Only she knew that beneath the diamonds and headlines, she was walking straight toward a tragedy waiting to unfold. It began quietly, the kind of connection that hides in the small spaces between glances. In the palace where every movement was watched, every breath monitored by protocol and status, Maria Liza Santos found herself seen for the first time not as the Sheikh's future wife, but as a woman. The Sheikh's personal bodyguard, Adil Khan, had been assigned to her in the weeks leading up to the wedding. He was a man of few words, disciplined, stoic, and invisible in the way only trusted guards could be. His job was to escort her between fittings, meetings, and rehearsals. He walked several steps behind her, always alert, always silent. Yet in those brief walks through echoing marble corridors, something unspoken began to form. Maria had grown increasingly anxious as the wedding approached. The palace, once dazzling, now felt like a prison, filled with eyes that judged and ears that whispered. Every smile from the Sheikh's family seemed rehearsed, every kind word from the staff forced. At night, she stared out of her penthouse window at the endless city lights, feeling both on top of the world and completely alone. One evening, after a long day of ceremonial rehearsals, she slipped out to the terrace to catch her breath. The desert wind was cool, heavy with the scent of sea salt. Adil stood by the glass doors, as always, keeping a respectful distance. When she turned toward him, her eyes tired and her voice trembling, she asked, "Do they all hate me?" Adil hesitated, unsure if he was even allowed to answer. But the words came softly, almost against his own discipline. "They don't hate you, ma'am," he said. "They just don't understand how someone could be brave enough to be loved by him." That moment broke the silence between them. Over the next few days, their conversations grew less formal. Adil spoke of his childhood in Lahore, his years in military service, and the quiet loneliness that came with guarding other people's happiness. Maria listened, really listened, because no one in the palace spoke to her without purpose. For him, she laughed again. For her, he became the only person in that palace who looked at her without calculation. Their exchanges moved from words to gestures. A glance held a second too long. A note passed discreetly through a folded napkin, text messages that appeared and vanished at midnight. They were careful, impossibly careful, yet they both knew that in this world of surveillance and status, nothing stayed secret forever. When Maria's fiancé noticed her new lightness, he grew suspicious. He began limiting her access to the staff, insisting she travel with family escorts. He changed her phone, monitored her messages, and told her that love needs control to survive. The more he tried to keep her, the more she felt trapped. And so the stolen moments with Adil became her only escape, their quiet refuge behind layers of danger. Sometimes, after royal meetings, he would escort her to the servants' wing instead of the main hall, allowing her a few minutes of peace in the laundry rooms, away from scrutiny. They talked about dreams of freedom, of starting over somewhere anonymous, where titles and money meant nothing. It was a fragile fantasy, but in their world of rigid power, even imagining such a thing was rebellion. Then came the night that changed everything. 3 days before the wedding, Adil found her crying in the corridor after a heated argument with the Sheikh's mother. Maria confessed that she couldn't sleep, that she feared marrying a man who loved ownership more than affection. Adil stepped closer, too close, and for a brief, irreversible moment, the line between duty and desire disappeared. He took her hand, and she didn't pull away. "Come with me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We can leave before the ceremony. I'll protect you." Maria stared at him, heart torn between longing and fear. "You don't understand," she said softly. "This marriage isn't about love, it's about survival." She walked away, leaving him in the shadows of the marble corridor. That was the last time they were alone. Within days, she was married, her smile frozen for photographs, her mind a storm. Adel watched from a distance during the ceremony, his expression unreadable. Yet in that silent crowd of royalty and servants, only two people knew the truth. The bride's heart belonged to the man standing behind her, and their secret would soon cost them both everything. The wedding was unlike anything Maria Liza Santos had ever imagined, a spectacle of gold, marble, and precision. The ceremony took place at one of Dubai's most opulent private estates, its grand hall transformed into a cathedral of light. White roses lined the aisle, crystal chandeliers reflected in pools of water beneath the glass flooring, and guests arrived in convoys of luxury cars. The bride's gown shimmered under the spotlights, a veil of gold-threaded lace, its edges embroidered with pearls, symbolizing purity and wealth. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale, the kind every young woman dreamed of. Cameras flashed as the Sheikh's son, Hamid bin Rashid, stood proudly before the crowd, his expression calm and regal. But behind that calmness was control. Every move Maria made was watched, every smile rehearsed. Even her vows had been written for her. From the corner of the hall, Adil Khan, the Sheikh's trusted bodyguard, observed quietly. He stood among the security staff, face impassive, posture rigid. Yet his eyes lingered a fraction too long when Maria appeared. For him, the celebration was agony disguised as duty. He had sworn to protect her, and now he was protecting her for another man. After the ceremony, the newlyweds were escorted to a private yacht bound for an exclusive island resort, a gift from Hamid's father. The sea stretched endlessly around them, reflecting the moonlight like broken glass. Maria sat beside her husband, silent, her fingers twisting the edge of her veil. Hamid, satisfied and possessive, leaned back in his chair, already discussing future plans, where they would live, who she would see, how she would behave. Adil was among the small team chosen to accompany them to the island for discreet protection. His presence was both comforting and unbearable. Maria avoided his gaze, but she could feel the weight of his silence. Every step he took behind her echoed with memories she was trying to bury, the terrace talks, the promises, the look in his eyes when she walked away before the wedding. The island was paradise sculpted from isolation, coral reefs, glass villas, and private beaches that hid the world away. But for Maria, it was a gilded prison. Inside the honeymoon suite, her husband's affection was suffocating, his temper unpredictable. He alternated between grand declarations of love and sharp bursts of jealousy, accusing her of distraction, of hiding something. At night, Maria stood by the window, watching the ocean crash against the rocks, the sound mixing with her heartbeat. Somewhere on the grounds, Adil patrolled the perimeter, his shadow passing across the sand. They were only a few meters apart, yet separated by a wall of duty, guilt, and fear. The perfect marriage had begun, not as a promise of love, but as a performance watched by guards, servants, and secrets. And on that island, beneath the glittering surface of paradise, a storm was quietly gathering, one that neither vows nor loyalty could contain. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that fills a room with suspicion. Just days into the honeymoon, the Sheikh's son, Hamid, began to notice a shift in Maria. Her voice, once filled with practiced warmth, had gone distant. Her eyes didn't meet his with the same adoration. She smiled, but only when someone was watching, and when no one was, she disappeared into herself. Hamid, already known for his possessive nature, didn't ask questions, he demanded answers. He insisted Maria hand over her phone. "For safety," he claimed. "You're my wife now, no secrets." Maria hesitated for just a second too long, and that was enough. To him, hesitation meant guilt. She gave him the phone. What he found was carefully wiped, no messages, no photos, no browser history. Too clean, suspiciously clean. But Hamid was not the only one watching. On the island, every corner of the villa was under discreet surveillance. Installed months prior for royal security, the cameras were known only to a select few, including one member of the housekeeping staff named Farid, a loyal servant who had worked for the family for over a decade. One night while reviewing routine footage, Farid stumbled upon something odd. In the library lounge, a room rarely used during the honeymoon, he saw Maria and Adel. It was brief. They stood close. Her hand grazed his. There were no kisses, no confessions, just a quiet, emotionally charged exchange. Adel's face was hard to read, but Maria's was unmistakably vulnerable, hurt, conflicted, afraid. Farid knew what he had seen, and more importantly, he knew what it would mean. He brought the footage to Hamid the next morning. What followed was a transformation. Hamid watched the video in silence. Once, twice, 3 times, no words, no shouting, just the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "She lied," he said. "On our wedding night, she was already thinking of someone else." In a culture where honor means everything, betrayal, even emotional, is unforgivable. To Hamid, this wasn't just a personal humiliation. It was a blow to his pride, to his family's name, and to his masculinity. The idea that his wife, a woman he had elevated from servanthood to royalty, would secretly share emotional intimacy with one of his bodyguards, a man beneath his station, was unthinkable. He did not speak to Maria that day, nor the next. He watched her instead. Every laugh was dissected, every glance tracked, every silence interpreted as deception. Meanwhile, Maria felt the shift. Hamid's gaze had sharpened, his touch had grown colder. The warmth he once forced upon her turned to quiet fury. He was waiting, but she didn't know for what. That night, Maria found herself alone in her suite. The staff had been dismissed early. The hallway, usually patrolled, was empty. Only the sound of waves crashing against the distant cliffs broke the silence. She had just removed her earrings when the door burst open. Hamid stood there, his eyes dark and unblinking. In his hand, he held her phone, now unlocked and restored to factory settings. In his other, a tablet displaying the footage from the library. "I gave you everything," he said, voice tight with rage. "A palace, a name, a life women beg for." Maria's breath caught. "It wasn't what you think," she whispered. "We didn't." He cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Don't insult me. Do you think I care if you kissed him? The betrayal was in your heart." She stepped back. "Please, it wasn't real. I was scared. I didn't want to be alone." "You weren't alone," he said. "You had me." "No," she said softly. "I never did." That was the last straw. What happened next was quick and horrifying. In a fit of rage, Hamid lunged. The argument turned violent. The polished suite that had hosted wedding champagne just days earlier now echoed with the sounds of a struggle. The forensic report would later confirm strangulation, consistent with hand pressure. No weapon was used, just fury and pride. When silence finally returned to the villa, Maria lay motionless on the marble floor. Hamid stood over her, panting, his hands shaking. And then he vanished. By the time the staff returned to the wing, the door was locked from the inside. Hours passed. No answer. It wasn't until sunrise that security forced their way in. They found Maria's body, her skin pale, her wedding ring broken, her eyes frozen in shock. Beside her was a shattered tablet. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no cameras in the bedroom. And Hamid was gone. The island was locked down immediately. Authorities were flown in. Adel, upon hearing the news, collapsed to his knees. He was taken into custody for questioning. Though the footage cleared him of being involved in the crime, he remained a person of interest. Maria's body was flown back to Dubai under tight guard. Her family in the Philippines was notified with only the barest details. She died in her sleep. But within days, the headlines told the real story. Bride found dead on Honeymoon Island. Dubai royal son missing after suspicious death. From fairytale to murder scene. What began as a Cinderella dream had ended in blood, and the truth behind it was still only beginning to surface. As sunlight broke over the secluded island retreat, Dubai authorities arrived by helicopter and boat, dispatched in urgency by the royal family's private security team. The scene they encountered was one of eerie stillness, sharply at odds with the brutality that had unfolded just hours earlier. The honeymoon suite was sealed off. Inside, the once immaculate marble floors were scuffed, a side table overturned, glass from a perfume bottle scattered across the room. Blood was minimal, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. The body of Maria Liza Santos lay at the foot of the bed, her bridal nightgown crumpled around her, the gold embroidery dulled by the pallor of her skin. Her neck bore faint, distinct bruises, oval-shaped, with pressure marks indicating manual strangulation. The absence of defensive wounds on her arms or hands suggested she had either frozen in shock or had known the attacker intimately, a classic sign of a personal crime. Within hours, a full Dubai police forensics team was flown in. Crime scene photographers captured every inch of the suite, noting no signs of forced entry. There were fingerprints, many belonging to staff and Maria herself, but on the silk headboard and glass tablet screen, only two sets appeared repeatedly, Maria's and Hamid's. In the lounge area, they found the shattered remains of the tablet that had shown the surveillance footage implicating Maria in an emotional affair. Its screen had been cracked clean through the center, likely thrown in rage. The timeline of events was pieced together with startling efficiency. Security footage showed Hamid entering Maria's suite alone at 10:46 p.m. No one else was seen exiting or entering the suite for the next 6 hours. At 5:22 a.m., a housekeeper attempted to deliver breakfast but found the door locked. It wasn't until 8:13 a.m., when guards forced the door open, that Maria's lifeless body was discovered. By then, Hamid was gone. A jet ski assigned to island staff had been reported missing sometime between 3:00 and 4:00 a.m. Coast Patrol radar later confirmed a small craft had crossed into open waters before disappearing from coverage. Meanwhile, on the mainland, Adil Khan, the Sheikh's personal bodyguard, was detained immediately after the body was discovered. Authorities considered him a key suspect. The motive, they believed, was clear: jealousy, rage, or perhaps an illicit plan to elope with the bride. Adil's interrogation was intense. For over 12 hours, he sat under fluorescent lights in a Dubai holding facility, his uniform still creased from the night patrol. He admitted to the emotional connection with Maria, describing their quiet conversations and shared empathy, but firmly denied any physical relationship. "She was already married," he said, "and I respected that." When pressed further, Adil acknowledged he had confessed feelings for her days before the wedding, and she had chosen to go through with it. "I let her go," he said. "I haven't spoken to her since." Phone records, surveillance footage, and Adil's duty logs corroborated his claim. On the night of the murder, he had been posted near the shoreline, over 300 meters from the villa. A fellow guard confirmed his presence during the critical window. Despite this, media outlets exploded with headlines implicating him. Royal love triangle ends in death. Bodyguard accused in Bride's Island murder. Was the marriage a cover for secret romance? In the Philippines, Maria's story became a national obsession. On Twitter, hashtags like Justice for Maria and Filipina Bride trended globally. Videos of her wedding circulated, alongside blurry screenshots of her with Adil. Memes, theories, and speculation filled comment sections. Journalists dissected her life, her rise from domestic worker to royal bride. Some painted her as a modern-day Cinderella, others questioned her motives. Underneath it all was a brutal reminder of how migrant women, especially Filipinas, are romanticized in life and exploited in death. The autopsy report, released within 72 hours, confirmed the cause of death: asphyxiation due to strangulation. There were no drugs, alcohol, or sedatives in her system. The bruising on her neck was consistent with someone being attacked in close quarters, from the front, likely by someone she knew and didn't expect to hurt her. The pattern of injury suggests an emotional trigger, the lead medical examiner stated. This was a crime of passion, not premeditation. As investigators built their case, a break came from an unlikely source: Coast Guard surveillance near the Oman border. A patrol boat, responding to reports of a suspicious vessel, had intercepted a private cruiser attempting to dock without authorization. Aboard was Hamid bin Rashid, disguised in civilian clothes, attempting to enter Oman with a diplomatic ID. He was detained immediately. News of his arrest reignited the public firestorm. Dubai authorities made a rare statement. A suspect has been taken into custody. The investigation remains ongoing. They did not name him, but everyone knew. Inside Dubai, the story was framed cautiously. State media referred to the incident as a family matter, suggesting Hamid had acted out of emotional distress after discovering his wife's deception. Several papers echoed the term crime of honor, a phrase that drew outrage abroad. In contrast, the Philippine government issued a strong diplomatic message, calling for transparency, justice, and full legal accountability. No woman, regardless of nationality, should be silenced for her choices, said the statement from the consulate. As public pressure mounted, international human rights organizations also stepped in, condemning what they saw as a case that exposed the deep power imbalance between royal elites and migrant women. Protest vigils were held outside the UAE embassies in Manila, New York, and London. Posters showed Maria's face under the words, "She wanted love, he gave her silence." The investigation, while officially swift, was surrounded by whispered concerns. Would Hamid receive full justice? Would the case be quietly buried to protect royal reputations? One thing was certain. The truth had surfaced, and no amount of wealth or power could keep it from being seen. Maria's death was no longer just a private tragedy. It had become a symbol of silenced voices, shattered illusions, and the high cost of love in a world ruled by control. The trial of Sheikh Hamid bin Rashid began in a climate of immense scrutiny and suppressed tension. While the case had captured international headlines, within the UAE the proceedings unfolded quietly, behind closed doors, under strict orders from the royal household. Officially, it was a matter of private tragedy. Unofficially, it was a test of how far justice would bend when pressed by wealth and legacy. The prosecution laid out a clear timeline of events, backed by security footage, forensic evidence, and the autopsy report. They argued that Hamid acted out of rage, but that his actions were not spontaneous. Instead, they pointed to the recovered surveillance footage, the smashed tablet, and the days of visible hostility leading up to the crime as proof of premeditation. There was time to walk away, the lead prosecutor stated. Time to seek clarity, to confront the truth, to choose restraint. But the accused chose violence not because he was provoked, but because he felt entitled to punish. The defense, however, painted a different picture. They described a man pushed to the edge by betrayal, a groom humiliated on his honeymoon watching footage of his wife with another man. His legal team framed the murder not as calculated, but as the result of temporary emotional insanity. They emphasized Hamid's clean record, his philanthropic work, and his cultural burden of honor and shame. Into this courtroom stepped Adil Khan, called to testify as both a witness and a cautionary figure. Tearfully, he recounted his connection with Maria, how they bonded over shared loneliness, how she confided in him her fears, her feelings of being trapped in a life chosen for her, not by her. "Yes, I cared for her," he admitted under oath. "But I never laid a hand on her, I never touched her. She was already married. She chose to honor that, even if it broke her heart." His voice cracked when he described the last time he saw her. On the wedding day, standing beside a man she didn't love, eyes silently pleading for something, maybe freedom, maybe forgiveness. Though cleared of all involvement in the murder, Adil was not celebrated as an innocent man. The royal court, citing security concerns and social disruption, ordered his deportation and issued a lifetime ban from re-entering the Emirates. He returned to Pakistan in silence, his career destroyed, his name now a permanent shadow in someone else's scandal. When the verdict was announced, Sheikh Hamid was found guilty of murder. The sentence, 15 years imprisonment. But within weeks, reports leaked that the term had been commuted to house arrest at a royal estate on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, a luxury compound with private staff, gardens, and full amenities. The news was met with international outrage. Women's rights organizations condemned the leniency, calling it a mockery of justice. In the Philippines, protests were held outside UAE embassies. Maria's face appeared on placards beside slogans that read, "She was silenced, we won't be. Murder is not a private matter." Beyond the headlines, the case ignited global conversations about power, gender, and race in the Gulf. Critics highlighted how foreign domestic workers, particularly from Southeast Asia, live under a shadow caste system, praised when obedient, punished when they cross invisible lines of desire or autonomy. Maria's story wasn't just about one murder. It became a symbol of systemic silence, a reminder that beneath the glittering towers of Dubai, too many women's stories end not in fairy tales, but in erasure. And while Hamid lived on in quiet luxury, Maria's legacy lived on in whispers, in the stories told by other migrant women, in the online forums where her name is still spoken, and in the eyes of every housemaid who knows the cost of stepping outside her place. Maria Liza Santos's body was flown home to the Philippines under heavy silence. At the airport, grieving relatives and migrant worker groups held candles, whispering prayers that blurred with tears. Her death was no longer just a private tragedy. It had become a national reckoning. Online, her story ignited outrage. Hashtags like Justice for Maria and End Migrant Abuse trended across platforms. Discussions erupted about the vulnerability of Filipina domestic workers in high society environments, where love is often exploited and silence is enforced by power. In the Gulf, her name was erased from official records, a discomfort the elite didn't want to remember. But Maria's story lived on. Human rights organizations began pushing for new protections, citing her case as a haunting example of what happens when status outweighs justice. In quiet conversations between maids and nannies across Dubai, her name became a whispered warning, a modern martyr of misplaced love and broken systems.